Okay, let's take a quick look at Planning Poker. Now, Planning Poker is another team collaboration exercise that you can use for numerous reasons, and one, of course, being getting your team to be more involved in estimating how long tasks will take. It's also really good for estimating in general, because one of the problems that we have with working out how much we can get done in the sprint is just working out how long certain tasks are going to take. And when we're working in a complex environment, such as when we're using Scrum, we don't always know how long certain tasks are going to take because we've not done them before. And to have one person's idea or thoughts on how long something's going to take is one approach, but it actually works out better to have multiple people feed into how long we think it might take, because through having multiple opinions and experiences, this is all extra information that can feed into how long a task might take, making it hopefully more accurate. It's another regular teamwork exercise that the team get together and have some ownership over their estimations, which gives them the empowerment and tries to break some of the old habits and set new habits of letting them have their voices heard. Now, I say a lot in my courses and in general that work estimation is super important. In my experience, I've found it to be really important. And this is because if you can estimate work accurately, then you can plan more accurately and you can set expectations better. It's always stressful when you underestimate how long something's going to take, and then all of a sudden you've made promises to deliver something and you find out through working on the task that things are taking a lot longer than you expected, and yet you've made those promises to senior people or customers and you're delayed, and that's when the stress really kicks in. So the ability to accurately estimate up front will really prevent a lot of stress further on down the line. Okay, so why is this technique called Planning Poker? Well, kind of for two reasons. One, you might want to use cards. It's not essential, but you might want to use cards. And secondly, like poker, you keep those cards close to your chest. You don't share what your cards are until the moment when you put them down on the table. Let me explain. Okay, so it's really important that everybody gets to make their own estimation on how long the task is going to take without being consciously or subconsciously influenced by anybody else. Now, what can happen is we can have an element of groupthink, can't we, where somebody with a lot of influence, maybe it's a highly respected developer or somebody more senior, goes first and says, I think this task is going to take 3 days. Well, that will then consciously or subconsciously influence everybody else in the team to sort of estimate around that ballpark. I suppose partly because people don't want to be outliers and be totally different from the group, because it takes some confidence to basically say, actually, I think this is going to take 2 weeks to do. If somebody of influence or if everybody else in the group has said, well, it's only going to take a few days. So for this reason, everybody gets the chance to estimate without knowing what everybody else's estimations are. Then it is revealed. This will become clear when I start explaining exactly how Planning Poker works. The first thing you're going to need, though, is a scale. You're free to choose your own scale. Just make sure that you do write it down and everybody understands what the scale is. I have had instances in my past where we've decided on quite a complicated scale, and then when we come back around to doing Planning Poker, we've forgotten what the scale was. Or even worse, when you come around to actually doing the task and somebody else comes along and picks up that task and they see it's got a value of 2, and they assumed 2 meant 2 days rather than 2 hours, for example. Just remember, one of the key things with Scrum and Agile is to be transparent, and being transparent means that everybody understands and knows what the scale is. Now, in the Scrum guide, it says that in sprint planning, you will look at the product backlog items and decompose them into smaller items of 1 day or less to go into the sprint backlog. So technically speaking, any of the items in the sprint backlog should be able to be done within a day. That technically means that our scale should be from a few hours to a full day at the maximum. Now, if you've got cards, or if you want to use units or write it down on a piece of paper and just say, we're just going to go with hours and 8 hours is a full day, then it could be 1 to 8. That would be a simple scale. Everybody knows that every increment on that unit is an hour, with 8 being the maximum for a full day. Another thing you could do is maybe use t-shirt sizes, so small, medium and large. And you might say that a small is an hour, a medium is 3 to 4 hours, and large is a full day, 8 hours. So that's about being a bit less precise. But with having a slightly less precise scale, it might help the group come to consensus a bit more easily. Another popular scale to use is the Fibonacci sequence. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. If you are using the Fibonacci sequence, and bear in mind some of the planning poker cards that you can actually buy will use this scale, make sure you are clear on what every increment in that scale actually represents as a unit of time. So perhaps you might decide that a 1 is 30 minutes, a 3 is an hour, 5 is 4 hours, 8 is 8 hours, as an example. Okay, so once you've got your scale and that's understood by everybody and written down so you remember it, it's time to start estimating. So what will typically happen is the product owner might read out a user story, which is an informal general explanation of a feature written from the perspective of that particular user. The great thing about user stories, of course, is that it's very user specific, so it keeps the focus on creating value for that user. Once it's read out and everybody understands what needs to be done, the team, the Scrum team, will then estimate how long they think it's going to take. And each person will either take one of the cards and not show it to people, or they will write down their figure. And when everybody is ready, everybody turns over the cards, just like in poker, to see what everybody's got. Now, what will happen is some people will agree with each other, and often there will be some people that slightly differ in terms of how long they think something's going to take. And every now and again, there might be somebody that is quite wildly out from the rest of the group, an outlier. They think it's either going to be much easier than what everybody else thought, or it's going to be a lot harder than what everybody else thought. At this point, the whole team can discuss their estimations, but it's particularly important to hear from the outliers. Why did they think that it was going to be a lot easier or a lot more difficult than everybody else? Perhaps they've got a really valid point, and maybe the team will think, shucks, yes, I didn't think of that. Or perhaps that person just misunderstood what the task was. If that's the case, that's no problem. It's just an opportunity to restate what the task that we're estimating is. And this really helps with transparency, because what's happened is somebody thought they understood what the task was, but they didn't. And that's been brought to the surface through their estimation. And it's given an opportunity to reiterate what the task was, making sure that it is transparent to everybody. Everybody understands what it is they're trying to estimate. Okay, after some discussion, we'll go around again. Now, the idea really is to keep repeating this until everybody comes to a consensus. However, if that's just not going to happen, if there is somebody that really does believe that the task is going to take longer than what everybody else predicts, that's fine. What's best to do then is to use the higher value. So it's not a vote, as in the most frequent estimate value that the team have picked is the one that wins. No, it's not like that. It is the higher estimate that we go with. And the reason is because, look, if somebody thinks that the task is going to take quite a bit longer, you're probably playing it safe if you go with the higher estimate. Just in the case that that person is actually correct, at least you've given it the adequate amount of time. If you went with the medium or the average, then you might actually underestimate your task, and that could cause problems in the future. So best to play it safe and to go with the higher estimate in that eventuality. Okay, and that's basically it. So not only is that a better way of estimating because you're drawing on multiple people's experiences and opinions, but you're also avoiding the group think and somebody going first and then influencing the rest of the group, because people are making their estimations before they've heard from anybody else. Also, they've got some ownership over it because they've had some input into it, and they feel empowered because they've had their voices heard and they've been able to input into it. And that's planning poker. If you are interested in learning a bit more about it, there's plenty of videos on YouTube that you can watch that give you a little bit more information about it. You can buy the cards as well, but it's not necessary. If you want to learn more about user stories and things like that, I'll put a link in the resources section of this lecture to the Atlassian page where you can read an awful lot of stuff that's really useful around estimation, user stories, story points, epics, and things like that. So that might be well worth having a look at as well. In fact, story points are very popular because using time and dates doesn't always account for the non-project related work that people end up having to do, which can distract and get in the way and make a task even longer because they haven't been able to fully focus on it. Dates also have an emotional attachment to them, and they want you to assign story points to the difficulty of the task rather than thinking about how long it will take, which keeps the team more focused on delivering value rather than simply focusing on how much time they've spent on it. Okay, I'll leave it there and I'll see you in the next lecture.